Good morning, fourth grade, and happy second week of online learning. Um, this video is going to be posted on the week 2 lesson plan document under Monday's math lesson. And again, we're going to be comparing fractions today. So I have the same 3 rules that we used in the first week to help us start to compare fractions. And these rules are going to be helpful today for your assignments, but we're going to spend some time talking about this third rule, comparing fractions to 1/2, in just a little bit. But I wanted to review how we can apply these rules. So if I'm looking at the first assignment on the lesson plan, it is called practice number 1. Practice number 1, the very first question has you comparing the fraction. So this is on the practice page. It's question 1A. And we're comparing 2/8 to 2/4. Okay, 2/8 and 2/4. It also gives you a picture where you can shade in 2 out of the 8 pieces and 2 out of the 4 pieces. I'll do a little demonstration here. With each of these questions, this one's split into 4ths, and this one is split into 8ths. On this first page, practice page number 1, it gives you a place to shade in the number of pieces. So this is going to help you create a visual of what 2/4 looks like. So I'm going to shade in 2 out of the 4 pieces. So I have 2 pieces that are colored red because the numerator is 2, and it was split into 4 pieces. So I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can do the same for 2/8. There's 1/8, and there's 2/8. This visual is helping me see that 2/4 is greater. It's taking up more of the pizza or the pie or the circle. But if we're going back to our rules here, it says when the numerators are the same, the smaller denominator is the larger fraction. So here's how we can apply rule number 1 to the very first question on practice page 1 for today's work. So 2/4 is greater than 2/8. I can use a picture to support that, or I can use my fraction rules. The next question that we wanted to go over, and this is question 1C on practice page 1 again. And this time we're comparing 5/12 to 10/12. This is an example of our second rule, and this says when the denominators are the same, the larger numerator is the larger fraction. So again, our denominators are the same, they're both 12. 10 is greater than 5. So 10 is the larger numerator, which tells us that 10 is the larger fraction. So 10/12 is greater than 5/12. I know this is a little bit quick. I know there's a little bit of a glare there. Sorry about that. It's a little bit quick, but we spent some time last week talking about these rules. Where I want to spend most of the time is talking about how we can compare fractions to 1/2. And to do this, I'm going to jump down to question 2B. And 2B is comparing the fraction 2/4 and the fraction 2/10. Okay? And for this one, we are going to be talking about comparing fractions to 1/2, this third rule here. So if you notice, off to the side, I have some fraction strips here. And each of these fractions is representing 1/2. So I have, starting at the top, 1/2. Here I have 1/4 and 1/4, which makes 2/4. So 2/4 is equal to 1/2. Here I have 3/6, 4/8, 5/10, and I have 6/12. So I'm going to use a number line to help us, if I can find my pages here, to help us illustrate this question. Okay? So here's my number line, and my number line is going from 0 to 1. And in the middle, I have marked off half of the number line. But I also have some fractions down below. And again, those are showing equivalent fractions. So 2/4, and if I go back to my fraction strips, 2/4 is the same as 1/2. 3/6 is the same as 1/2. 4/8 is the same as 1/2. 5/10 and 6/12 are equivalent to 1/2. So this is really helpful because it will bring, if I can place these two fractions on a number line, it's going to create a visual of what fraction is larger than the other. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that, or how you can do that right now. So my first fraction was 2/4. And here I have 2/4. So I know that this fraction on the left is going to be right here. And I'm going to put a little dot right on my fraction line, or my number line there. So there's 2/4. And my other fraction is 2/10. Well, if I know that 5/10 is the same as 1/2, 2/10 is less than 5/10. So I know that 2/10 must be somewhere over here. So by creating equivalent fractions and comparing fractions to 1/2, right? So again, here I'm going to pull my fraction strips out. This would have been 5/10, and that's equal to 1/2. But I'm comparing 2/10. So if I'm taking away, I know I must be moving closer to the 0. Closer, or further away from 1/2, closer to 0. So I'm creating a visual showing that 2/10 is obviously less than 5/10. And if 5/10 is equal to 1/2, I must know that 2/4 is greater. Okay? 2/4 is greater. Over on this side, I have just a kind of a helpful trick, the way that my brain works and kind of what I need to always remind myself of, is when I'm trying to determine what is half of the denominator. So say I was comparing a fraction and the denominator was 16. I want to ask myself, what times 2 will give me 16? And I know with my multiplication facts, I know that 8 times 2 is 16. Another way to think about this, again, if my denominator was 16, I could ask myself, what plus what? It needs to be the same number. Right? It might be hard to tell, but I'm using the same color that's underlined here. I need the same number that when I add it together will give me 16. And again, I know that 8 plus 8 is 16. That's helping me determine what the halfway point is between the denominator. So if I had a fraction that was split into 16ths, what would be half of that? Well, I know that 8/16 is the same as 1/2. This gets a little bit trickier when you have odd denominators, okay? So I want to remind you, or kind of point out, that right now all of our denominators here are even. And it's really easy to find the halfway point. If you have fractions, and you'll see this on the practice page, if you have fractions that have an odd denominator, so if I look at question 2C, we're comparing 6/9 and we're comparing 5/5. I have two odd denominators, so using that halfway point trick is not as useful here. However, knowing my or using my knowledge of fractions and knowing that if I have 5/5, whenever the numerator is the same as the denominator, let me grab my other fifth. Here I have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. That is equal to 1 whole. Oh, it's upside down. That is equal to 1 whole. So I don't have fraction strips that are split into ninths, but I already know that 5/5 is greater because this would have to be 9/9 to be equivalent. And because it is less than 9, because our numerator is less than 9, I'm going to know that the 5/5 is the larger fraction because it is equivalent to 1 whole. Okay? Hope that helps. I encourage you to make a number line, try to place fractions on it. On your practice page number 1, try to color in the, use the pictures to help you illustrate the fractions, and that will really give you a better representation of which fraction is larger. I'm going to put this up here one more time. I strongly encourage you to use this to help you out. Apply these 3 rules. Think about trying to compare it to 1/2. Think about making a number line and trying to place your fractions on that number line. Okay? But again, here's this. If you want to take a picture of it, you want to write it down in your notes, because these are important rules when we're comparing fractions. Good luck today. Email your teachers if you have any questions. You got this. And good luck for week 2.